Birth control is on the congressional chopping block. On Wednesday, Senate Republicans blocked legislation aimed at protecting women's access to contraception. In a 51-39 majority, the test vote failed to garner the 60 votes needed to move the bill forward.
GOP senators stood firm as they sunk the Right to Contraception Act, which would have codified the right to contraception in federal law. They are claiming it's merely an election ploy by Democrats. Democratic senators slammed Republicans in a press conference following the vote. Let's watch.
Here we are in a situation where today Republican colleagues voted against protecting our freedom to make our own decisions about birth control.
We have an obligation not to sweep it under the rug, but to move forward and in not having show votes, showing who you are vote. That is the democratic process. We're proud we're doing it.
But Republicans, of course, pushed back. Here they are.
Contraception is available in every state in America, and there's no legitimate effort to change that.
These votes have nothing to do with legislating and everything to do with boosting Democrats' electoral chances.
Here to help make it all make sense is congressional reporter for The Hill, Mychael Schnell. Thanks for coming in, Michael.
I don't know if I can help make it make sense, but we could absolutely try. Thanks for having me, guys.
So we get the Republican and Democrat talking points ever since the overturning of Roe. Is there a legitimate threat to not abortion, contraception and birth control on a federal level that needs a federal response here from the Democrats?
Yeah, well, that, of course, depends on who you ask, right? Democrats think that there is a credible threat, and that's why they want to go ahead with this legislation. Republicans, that was a number of their reasons why they voted against this legislation yesterday. A lot of Republicans saying, look, I support access to contraceptives, of course, but I'm not going to sort of give into your show of having this vote because there's no real threat to contraceptives right now. Look, this all gets back to the idea that Democrats control the floor in the Senate, and we are just now months away from the November elections. There's no more must-pass legislation on the to-do list until about September, when we have to once again deal with government funding. So how do you fill that time? Well, the leaders in each chamber want to fill that time by putting legislation on the floor that will help them on the campaign trail. They want to give their most vulnerable members and even some regular rank and file guys a vote that they can cast and then go home and talk to their constituents about that. This contraceptive vote is the most recent example of that because, of course, Democrats have been emphasizing women's reproductive health and reproductive rights in the lead up to November. It was such a crucial topic for them back in 2022. They're hoping they can sort of do that again, have the wind behind their back of the topic of abortion and reproductive rights, and have that help propel them to victory.
And I don't think there's any doubt at all that Democrats see this electorally or politically as a bright spot, right? They face challenges on all kinds of other issues, immigration, the president's age, etc. Reproductive rights broadly are clearly considered by Democrats to be an electoral advantage. Do Republicans get the vulnerability that they face there? I mean, they can decide, of course, to vote whatever way they like, but do they understand the political pitfalls for them on that issue?
I think so, and I think that one of the reasons why, you put it perfectly, Niall, Democrats see political gold in this issue of abortion. They're so good at messaging on it, and it is so salient with their voters. Well, the other reason why it's really tactical for them is because Republicans are terrible at messaging on abortion and reproductive rights. I mean, we saw them sort of flub with the IVF conversation when that came up. We saw them after Roe v. Wade was overturned, after decades of campaigning on, hey, we're going to get Roe v. Wade overturned. Okay, well, now that it is overturned, what do you do now? How do you message that now? So it's sort of this double-edged sword because it's so effective for Democrats because they're so good at it, and Republicans are so bad at it. And I think they're now sort of seeing that play out with like a bill to protect access to contraceptives, something that a lot of Republicans agree with. Only 2 voted for this bill yesterday, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. Republicans still cannot figure out how to message on this very important issue. It's why Democrats are going to keep pushing it down their throats.
Yeah, I mean, in the states we were just talking about in Missouri, there was a health care bill for women that was been stalled for months because Republicans held it up because they were conflating expanding access to birth control with medication-based abortion. There's a great lack of understanding and messaging on this issue. But Tom Tillis of North Carolina in the Senate, he's always been banging the drum about the issue of birth control access. I remember when he was running for Senate in North Carolina, where I'm from, he used to say that it should be as available as candy at CVS. And he has, as of yesterday, he has a bill out titled Allowing Greater Access to Safe and Effective Contraception Act. He's been on this for a long time, making it completely available in the private market. I think what we're usually debating, though, is who's paying for it. Is it covered under insurance for everybody of every background? And where does religious freedom come into the factor for employers?
Right, sure. I mean, all those conversations are important ones. The only thing is that in this situation right now, Democrats don't want to talk about the nuance of that. They don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of it. They just want to...
Are you telling me they're misleading their voters?
I'm not going to go there.
The threat of an actual federal abortion?
Are they misleading their voters, given that former President Trump has said he's open to a ban, though?
When she described the way that Democrats were thinking about this and how they're messaging to their voters, it is taking advantage of the fact that their voters think there is going to be a federal threat to birth control.
But they think it because the former president has implied he could do.
He answered a question very strangely. Do you have the quote in front of you? Because this is kind of what this all stemmed from.
I don't want to put Ms. Schnell in an awkward position here. So one other...
Well, I will say, quite frankly, this is how Democrats are playing the issue of abortion, but you can sort of draw some parallels between how Republicans are playing the issue of the Israel-Hamas war and the situation at the southern border, particularly the Israel-Hamas war. In the House, we've seen Republicans put a number of bills on the floor that are meant to split Democrats, talking about the rallying cry from the river to the sea, something that obviously Congresswoman Tlaib has come under fire for saying, something that Democrats are going to maybe not want to criticize her for, despite feeling a certain way. They are going to try to put legislation on the floor that is disapproving of the way President Biden is handling the conflict. And it's just, this is what happens when you are in the lead up to November. So it's not just Democrats, it's also Republicans, because again, everything that happens when you are just so close to an election is political, and there's no other must-pass legislation on the docket. So lawmakers have this time on their hands to have these show votes, and they're trying to strategize of how to best make it in their advantage.
On that point, Michael, you follow Congress very authoritatively and thoroughly, and much more so than I do. Are there more messaging bills that are sort of on deck? Do we know what those will be, or is that sort of to be decided?
Still to be decided, but I think that we can sort of assume what we're going to see. We're probably going to see in the Senate an IVF bill, because that plays into the idea of reproductive rights. It's something that, again, Democrats have been very adamant about that they want to protect. Republicans, too, have been adamant that they want to protect access to IVF. But, this will sort of put them in a pickle of how will they vote on this legislation? They haven't been good at handling it. In the House, I think that we're going to continue to see things about two issues. The situation at the southern border, because that is sort of what Democrats are good at, abortion. Republicans are good at the border, and Democrats are really bad at the border. So it's sort of that magic issue, and not to mention that it's very salient among voters right now. Republicans want to run home with the issue of the border. So I think we're going to see a lot about that, and a lot more of these pieces of legislation that are meant to split Democrats on the Israel-Hamas war. Remember, we're only in June right now. Congress may be out of session in August, but we've got July, we've got basically the whole month of June, and a little bit of September, because Congress doesn't deal with anything until we're right before that deadline, that September 30th, the government funding deadline. It's a lot of days to fill. It's a lot of votes to have. Leaders in both parties, again, want to stage these votes so their most vulnerable members can take these consequential votes, go home, and tell their constituents why they voted that way.
You're absolutely right about the power of these kind of votes to split the different caucuses. The Democrats have been destroyed in terms of unity on the Israel and Gaza issue, and Republicans are not ready for an IVF conversation, which is set to kick off next week. What do we know exactly about where that bill and that motion is coming from, and have Republicans said anything on that yet?
Still sort of developing right now. The conversation this week really was that contraceptive bill and getting that on the floor and letting Democrats message on that and Republicans respond to that. Schumer has indicated that IVF could come next and that he wants to eventually see a vote on that, but we haven't actually seen the specifics of what that legislation will look like and how Republicans are reacting to it. But I mean, we'll remember when this issue first came onto the forefront, I think it was with that Alabama case, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. We saw Republicans at first praise it, and then some Republicans backtrack and not praise it and say that they support IVF. So, a little uncharted territory, muddied waters there. We'll see if they've honed in on a message this time. Nonetheless, Democrats are daring them to see if they figured it out.
And there's a really wonderful op-ed right after the Alabama decision that came out from Republican pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson over at CNN. It's in the New York Times, writing about personal experiences with IVF and just how dangerous this issue is going to be for Republicans who do not have a fully coherent position on the right to life and what you're talking about when you're talking about embryos and keeping them frozen, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be a mess.
For sure it is. I just want to take advantage of your presence, Mychael, because I wanted to actually go slightly off what we were discussing to something you mentioned briefly, which was immigration, the border, how bad that is for Democrats. And obviously President Biden issued the executive order regarding amnesty, trying to tighten up the border. And what was your read of how congressional Democrats broadly reacted to that?
I don't know if there's a broad reaction to it.
Right.
It was sort of all over the map. We saw a lot of progressives and liberals, as expected, come out pretty strongly against this legislation. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus has sort of been the leading voice and the most authoritative voice for progressives and liberals frustrated with this. They said that, this was unacceptable, that an enforcement-only executive order is not the right way. There needs to be some sort of path to citizenship component that needs to come. But then we heard from a number of, frontline Democrats, people like Pat Ryan, who's in one of those more vulnerable districts, who said this is the needed first step to addressing the situation at the southern border, noting that it would have been better for this to go through Congress and for there to be a bipartisan way forward on this matter. But vulnerable Democrat in a district that may lean a little bit more Republican or just not be a deep blue state, a deep blue district, essentially saying that this was the right path forward. So it's really been mixed based on what district you hail from, what what your beliefs are in that area. But again, this has been an issue that has split liberals and more centrist, moderate Democrats right down the middle, and Republicans are going to keep running with it because it's an effective message.
This should be a normalcy election. What Joe Biden entered the White House on in 2020 was return to normal, less political chaos, less unpredictability. Things have been pretty wild. Democrats, particularly border state Democrats, are hungry for a Democratic Party who look like they take normalcy seriously. And the immigration issue is one of those big ones for them.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And that's why we saw a lot of those Democrats sort of pleased with President Biden's order. And let's not forget to mention, lawmakers can read polling, right?
Are you sure?
You'd assume. The situation at the southern border and immigration is the issue this election cycle. Gallup found it to be the top issue of importance to voters back in April. It was the third month in a row. And then sort of on the other side of the coin, our partners at Decision Desk HQ had a poll that said that voters trust former President Trump double the amount than they trust Biden on the border. I think the number was 47 to 25 in favor of Trump. So clearly this, it's an issue that is most important to voters, and it's an issue that Democrats severely lag on. So something had to be done. You couldn't just ignore this any longer. I think that a lot of those vulnerable Democrats recognized that and wanted the president to do something because they want to try to, win on his coattails and follow his lead. So if they can get some wind behind their back on this issue of immigration, it could really help because obviously we know this election is going to be extremely close.
One thing, Mychael, before we let you go, just to flip back to where we started, how much confidence are you detecting among Democrats that the broad issue of reproductive rights could help them overcome some of these headwinds that they face?
100% confidence. I mean, maybe it's confidence, maybe it's just really hoping that it is. But I mean, look, we spoke a lot about the red wave in 2022. I mainly cover the House. Republicans were supposed to have this massive majority in the House. They were going to have real substantive policy that was going to get over the finish line. That just didn't happen because the way that Democratic voters were so galvanized on the issue of abortion was in such a strong fashion. That red wave never came to shore. We're now dealing with this razor-thin majority. Republicans can barely get anything done in the House because they need all their ranks together. Democrats are hopeful, especially with recent cases and seeing all these states now implement full or restrictive abortion bans, seeing the IVF issue come into play, seeing contraceptives now in the news cycle. They're hoping that having this story in the headlines can once again be the wind behind their back to propel them to wins. Whether or not it will be effective, we'll have to see. The Dobbs decision was seismic. It was explosive. I mean, it was landmark. Are there still reverberations from that? Absolutely. Will they be strong enough to give Democrats what they need? That we'll just have to wait and see.
Mychael Schnell, so great to have you here. Thanks for all that great reporting.
Thanks
we'll
so
see you again soon. And we will have more Rising after this.